In this video, I want to take a moment to explain where Trey Jadlow is seeing a contradiction and give reasons as to why he is mistaken. It is my hope that in doing so, not only may Trey come to see where it is that others are finding issue, but also that those who argue against his position will understand his objection and take the proper course, and in doing so, avoid overstating or misstepping in response to his badgering. First, let me establish that, yes, all causes entail subsequent effects, and all effects entail antecedent causes. This is by definition, as it is what we mean by causation. As Trey likes to put it, it would be to say that the effect is contingent upon the antecedent cause. I would further argue that the cause is contingent upon the effect, but that's an argument for another day.
Have you ever thought about going into stand-up comedy?
Settle down, Trey. This contingent relationship between a cause and its resulting effect is also what Trey is implying when he uses the term happening. It is to say that something has experienced change, and by that it is meant that change entails an antecedent state from which the thing became what it is no longer. This is what Trey means by happening and by becoming. This is where Trey would reference the pre-Socratic Heraclitus, who said that you can't step in the same river twice. This is because the river is becoming what it was not from its prior self. While I have mereological objections to these notions, for the sake of the argument I can table them. So in Trey's mind, effects happen or become by means of an antecedent cause, where there is an antecedent state and a change occurs such that if something becomes something else, there is a cause and an effect. Okay, now for where he sees a contradiction and for where his errors lie. The question on offer is it possible for an uncaused event to obtain? Upon this text hitting the screen, Trey has just yelled out, "No, my friend, you're violating the law of non-contradiction." So where is the contradiction as Trey sees it? By Trey's lights, all events are contingent on a prior state from which they became. So by uttering uncaused event, what Trey is hearing us say is it possible for an uncaused, caused effect to obtain? Were we saying that, then yes, this would be a contradiction, and Trey would simply need to show that we are saying that. But the meaning within the question, is it possible for an uncaused event to obtain, is of an event where no antecedent cause is present, and thus no effect entailed. The very question being asked is whether it is possible for a state of affairs to obtain uncaused. That obtaining necessarily entails cause is the very thing being brought forward as a question for consideration. For Trey to insist that events definitionally imply causes and effects is to beg the question against skepticism. The skeptical position would be that not all events have antecedent causes. That is the question on offer. Defining it away, absent reasons within the framework of an argument by which to demonstrate that it can't be, is to beg the question. One cannot answer this by stipulating events necessarily entail antecedent causes from which they are the effect, for that is to beg the very question, can a state of affairs obtain without cause? Upon this objection, Trey will often want to ask, are events happening? Well, remember, Trey's definition for happening entails an effect with a prior cause. So again, by definition, he's looking to beg the question. The question on offer is it possible for an uncaused event to obtain? And Trey needs to demonstrate that by means of a reasoned argument, why it is not possible if he wishes to assert that it's not possible. And just to cover all the bases, let us recall that by becoming, Trey means to say a caused effect. And he would yet again be begging the question against skepticism to insist that all events are becoming by that definition. In addition to begging the question, I think Trey is committing the fallacy of affirming the consequent through his equivocations. One can say, premise 1, if there is a caused effect, then there is an event. Premise 2, X is a caused effect. Conclusion, therefore, X is an event. But what Trey is wanting to say is, premise 1, if there is a caused effect, then there is an event. Premise 2, X is an event. Conclusion, therefore, X is a caused effect. Trey is inferring the converse of the first premise. We have experience with causes and effects, and when they manifest, they do so as events, as becoming, as change within the states of affairs. Premise 1 implies that all caused effects are events, but it does not imply that all events are caused effects. Trey is wanting to assert that not only do caused effects imply events, but that they are only what implies events. This again is the question on the table. are all events caused effects? Trey would need to establish that events can only occur where there is causation. In order to assert the logical necessity of all events entailing causation, Trey would need to demonstrate the impossibility of the contrary. What is on the table is the possibility of such a state of affairs, and Trey cannot beg the question by stipulating that it's impossible. He must demonstrate it by means of a reductio ad absurdum for the skeptical position as it relates to his assertion. That is the only means by which one demonstrates that what is on offer is not possible. There is no contradiction, at least there aren't any that he has demonstrated, and his thinking that there is one comes as a result of him begging the question. Why is any of this important? Because our inferences related to causation are relevant to when some antecedent effector obtains and causes change in the prior existing affected. We have no inference for a state of affairs where no antecedent effector obtains and no prior existing affected obtains. Our inferences relate to things affecting other things. In the case that no thing obtains, were some thing to obtain, there would be no antecedent thing by which to cause it. Upon what inference would we conclude that such a thing were not possible? A theist might be tempted to leverage this lack of an antecedent thing to invoke the necessity of a god to act as the antecedent cause. But such a being would be instantiating an obtaining state of affairs of some things from no things. Our causal inference is relevant to an antecedent material and efficient cause. In this case, our inferences regarding causation are equally ill-suited, rendering a creator no better in inference based on causation than a state of affairs where no thing obtains. Where we insist on what can be inferred by our experience with causation, we can only infer that some things have been composed from and by antecedent some things, and go no further. We simply lack inferences by which to conclude what is possible or necessary for a state of affairs where what it is we are familiar with is not to be found. Anyone saying otherwise must show the necessity by means of demonstrating the impossibility of the contrary. For Trey, that is your burden for what you wish to claim. You're making a synthetic proposition about the world based on the inference that there are no states of affairs that obtain uncaused. You can either prove your logical necessity but for causes by demonstrating non-question begging impossibilities, you can revise or find new arguments, or you can soften your assertions into questions of what is more or less plausible. Your arguments being considered rational by the community depend on it, and by your failure to satisfy the burden you yourself have created, you will take your place amongst those you find to be absurd within the community. Your errors are becoming evident to nearly all, and you only have yourself to blame. Believe it or not, I'm actually rooting for you. For those who would argue against Trey, I would encourage you to not say things like there can be effects without causes, or that the pre-Socratics are rubbish. They're not, and when you have a moment, I'd encourage you to watch one of the several fine YouTube breakdowns of Heraclitus and Parmenides. In the case of Trey's argument, we don't even have to go as far as finding examples of what we feel might constitute uncaused events. Trey is arguing a logical necessity, which is to say that anything else is an impossibility. That's a proposition concerning the world which carries a hefty burden that one clears only by means of demonstrating a reductio. When Trey invokes change, happening, or becoming in the event that you ask him to demonstrate the necessity of cause, I would ask him what he means by those terms. And where you see him invoke a definition that smuggles in cause, that you ask him to not equivocate. You're asking about uncaused events. And in the case that Trey wants to define event as caused effect, either explicitly or through an equivocation, he's begging the question against skepticism. Logically necessary implies an impossibility to the contrary, and Trey is on the hook for demonstrating such a strong assertion. This is a good thing for Trey, and a good thing for us. Were we allowed arguments that employ errors and fallacies akin to his question begging, not only would God have been defined out of existence long ago, but as well, the world would be filled with far more irrationality than we currently see, and far more cackles of misplaced incredulity. Thank you very much.